Right, back in the container. It's a few months on since I did the racking. It's not managed to fall out or fall over, so I'm pretty pleased with that. In fact, it's not really moved at all. The only thing I've noticed is on the cornerstones. I sat the container on like paving slabs on the corners to sort of take the weight only on the corners, so it's not sat on ground all the way along the container, it's sort of suspended. I did notice they've just settled very slightly. It must be because of the extra weight of the timber on this side, so they've moved and dropped sort of slightly into the ground, about 5mm, but you'd probably expect that anyway with sort of a new foundation that's not solid, not concrete. It's just sort of laid on some hardcore and gravel. So yeah, otherwise it's been fairly good. Not seen any movement at all in the racking, so safe to say I think it was strong enough for the job. If you were really worried about this falling over, the little blocks of wood that I put at the top in the ceiling, you could have them extending all the way across the ceiling so that they actually touch the far side of the container, and you're sort of supported by the strength of that piece of wood in compression then, so there's no way it's going to fall over. But my friend Benny, that does all my video editing for me, has put all the questions I've had about the container into a little file for me, so I'm going to run through them really quick and try and answer most of them. The majority of the questions I get are regarding joining the stud work to the steel outsides of the container. It seems to be quite a common question for people that are looking to do this sort of conversion or make a house out of a container. I'll do a quick demonstration of what I did, because it obviously wasn't that clear in the original video of how I fixed the wood to the steel sides. This is the batten that I was using to build the frames out of. It's C24 that's been ripped down the middle, so it's about 43 by 47mm, something like that. So X 2-inch timber. Now I made a panel all the way down the wall, as you saw in the container video, and people are saying, how did you fix that to the walls? So once I've made one stretch, and I'll turn the camera inside so you can see, once I'd made the panels all the way down the two sides of the container, then connected them at the top with pieces that were the same length as the width they were at the bottom. So in effect I'd got a sort of a square frame within the container, and then once that frame was against the steel like this, they were about 20 to 25mm away from the edge of the container, so it's sort of free floating within the steel. It wasn't actually touching the steel at any point. The floor was screwed down, and that was nice and straight along the side, so I'd put a straight line down on the floor. That was fixed down, and then everything else was free floating, so not attached at all. So in order to fix that in place, I screwed through the timber, so no pilot hole at all. And then I put a screw straight through the timber like so. So that screw is fixed in the timber, and then at every point, 3 or 4 points on every piece of timber in the verticals, I screwed that screw through until it touched the steel. So the point of the screw goes through the timber and touches the steel. And if you see, when you keep turning that screw, it jacks the piece of wood away from the steel container. So what that enables you to do then is, because the floor is fixed, if you put one of these at the top of the piece of timber, right at the top in the ceiling, and screw it through, you can then take a level and level the piece of timber and turn the screw until it makes it level within the container. So that is how I fixed the frames in place. There's no actual fixing through from the outside holding the timber in. I just did that sort of method of jacking the frames off the walls in every direction. So when I'd done the left hand side and got it level, go to the right hand side and put the screw in until it makes it tight, and they're both nice and level. The only other trick to this method is if your timber is got a bow in the length so that it's not perfectly straight, which, let's be honest, it's definitely going to have. What you want to do is on the outside of the container, so say down on this wall here, we want to have the bow of the timber so it bows outwards. So when you fix the bottom and you fix the top and screwed it to the container and got the top point level with the bottom point, at that point then you can put screws in the centre and jack that curved piece of timber away from the sides of the container to make it straight. If you put the curved piece of timber so the curve sits inside in sort of that cupped direction, obviously putting a screw through to jack it off the side isn't going to work. So you need a little bit of forward planning to make sure you get all your timbers orientated in the right direction. Right, so the next question that pops up an awful lot, yep, we're on the piss, is about the spray foam. So the company that did the spray foam was Webster's Insulation. I'll pop a link to their website down in the description, and it's just a closed cell 2-component foam that they spray on, and they spray on about 1mm worth of uncured foam, and then that expands out and creates 1 inch's worth of insulation. The patterns that I've just been talking about and how they were screwed to the walls and jacked away, you might think, well, that's not fixed it very well. That was literally just to get them in the right position so that when the spray foam guys came along, they could spray in and around the back of the battens, and that foam will set between the steel outside container and the batten that's sat in and slightly away from it. So that sort of rigid, hard foam encapsulated the whole of that batten and holds it in place. So there isn't really much need for a fixing through from the outside to the in to hold it solid, because once that foam has got all the way around the entire batten, all the way up through the whole length, it was really solid. There's no way you're going to move that. Cost was another issue that pops up a lot in the questions. This is going to be a bit subjective because currently we're sort of in the COVID crisis. Shipping has gone mental. No one can get shipping containers, or they're very pricey. So if you're looking to do this at the minute, at the time of releasing this video, it's probably going to cost you a fair bit more than it actually cost me. I got quite lucky that I bought the container just before all this kicked off. So I paid, I think it was about 2,170 quid for the container with the VAT, so it's something like 1,700 quid from memory. The spray insulation was pretty much exactly the same cost as the container, and that was for 1 inch sprayed foam on the floor, walls, ceiling and the doors. So I think it worked out fairly good value. The only thing is I've probably got a tiny bit more than 1 inch in places, because obviously I asked for them battens to be fixed in and made sure they were captured by the spray foam. So where the batten fell in like a hollow of the steel frame, I've probably actually gained a bit of extra insulation in them places. So I don't think it's too bad when you weigh up the cost against using dedicated Celotex boards, and then the fact that you've got to try and get it in the container and then the battens in front of it, and you've still got like tiny air gaps with that stuff, whereas the spray foam, it literally sticks to the steel and there's no way you're going to have an air gap or any form of condensation. So that sort of leads on to another question that gets asked a lot about do you get condensation? The answer is no. There's absolutely no condensation whatsoever, because that foam is actually stuck to the steel. It works sort of like a SIPS insulated panel. You're removing that cold bridge point between the inside and the outside cold steel. So the only condensation you'll get is on the outside of the container, sort of where the dew hits the steel. On the inside it's lovely and dry, because like I say, you've removed that point of condensation. Someone's asked about using 2x4s sort of width-wise for the frame to reduce the amount of insulation you needed. Like I say, they priced the insulation just from sort of, it's a container, I wanted 1 inch of insulation, and when the guys turned up they were pretty amicable and just sort of did exactly what I wanted, really. I think if I'd have asked for the walls and sides and doors to be sprayed and forgot to ask about the floor and then bunged them 50 quid while they were here, I think they'd have just sprayed the floor for me as well. So might be worth considering that option if you want to save a few quid. Just have a quick chat with the guys and I'm sure they'll sort you out. How did I fasten the framing to the front doors? That was actually physically screwed to the doors, but the doors are a double skin. The door itself is a box section, so that is like a piece of 2x4 box section just here, and that is my 2-inch batten that I just screwed affixed to the box section on the inside. Bring that up and have a look. And then the boarding sits over the top of that. So once I've got that box frame around the inside of the door, I then had that spray foamed on the inside where the door is single skin, because it's just a box section frame with this bit as is single skin that spans between it, and then we've got the chipboard that's on the inside. Right, ventilation. You could have ventilation in if you've not got any dehumidifying, or if you're putting stuff in here that's likely to have a high moisture content, then you might need some form of ventilation running through. The only thing with ventilation is you're going to need some form of heat source or some way of counteracting the fact that you're bringing cold air in. So like a house, centrally heated house, ventilation is good because you've got the warmth in the house, but the ventilation brings fresh air through and keeps everything nice and clean and fresh inside. Yes, if you don't ventilate it, you're going to get a build-up of potentially polluted air, but you just really got to be careful in what you're putting in there. So it's just got timber in here, and yeah, I've got the dehumidifiers running, taking any moisture out, and obviously trying to bring that moisture content of that timber down. So I can't see as it's been a problem. Nothing in here is deteriorating at all. It's like the perfect storage environment at the minute. It just keeps everything nice and stable. So I've not experienced the need for ventilation, but I can't see us having a vent perhaps in the end and near the doors would be a bad thing. Obviously it's just going to, in the colder months, require more heating to bring that temperature up. Now in terms of heating, I did put a radiator in here. It's a bit buried at the minute because I've not been using it during the summer. I'll see if I can see a little bit of it. But there goes a bit of it down there. Got half a kitchen stacked in front of it at the minute. But the pipes are down here, as you can see, sneaked in the back, and the radiator's actually behind these sheets. So these will be going quite shortly to be fitted, and I'll have the radiator back online for the winter months. So that radiator's just on a normal TRV, thermostatic valve, and that runs off the central heating system that I've got in the workshop, and it just comes on whenever the workshop's cold. It's obviously going to be cold outside, so it just bums a bit of heat through, and it works off a valve in here. So once it's up to temperature in here, that valve switches off and doesn't get too hot. But during the winter it's always nice and warm in here. I'd say it probably sits about 13 degrees C. I've got my workshop thermostat set to 15, and yeah, it just stays a fairly constant 13 degrees. When you come in here during the winter and it's sort of frosty and cold outside, perhaps been about 0 degrees overnight, it's lovely and warm and dry inside the container, so it really does work well. Right, so a few common questions coming through again is the size of the container, and what sizes I made the timbers and the inside framing. So what I'll do is I'll just ping it with a laser for you. If you're drawing this out on SketchUp and want to do a cut list of, you know, you can work everything backwards from these measurements. So I've used 18mm OSB boarding, and this is the inside sections of that 18mm OSB. So take notes if you are looking to do one of these. So the width between the inside width, so the parallel inside width between the two walls. Try and find the point where it's actually clear. I've made that 2-1 2,172, so that's 2,172. The height, let's find a bit here. The height is 2,557 millimeters. The length, so from this board here that's screwed to that batten that's screwed to the back of the doors, all the way down to the other end of the container, up that end, that is, we can see that, that is 11 meters 879 millimeters. So that's the width, the height and the length. And then these doors here, I'll just quickly give you that panel size. That is 1 meter 140 mil width on that panel, and the height of that is 2,530 mil. So from the bottom to that panel that's screwed to the back of the door, that's the height of that. So like I say, you can work back from that. I think I bought 10-foot timbers to do the uprights, and then 8 foot for everything else, so the floor battens and the ceiling battens. Going back to the radiators, somebody's asked about the temperature difference before and after doing the insulation. There's absolutely no contest in it. This is hands down one of the best things that I've invested in for my small workshop. So if you've got the space outside of your workshop for a 20-footer even, I'd 100% recommend you get something like this and deck it out, insulate it, and put the boarding round. It's such a handy space just to be able to make something in the shop and get it out of there. So you very rarely make something and go and fit it straight after making it. So it's just nice to get rid of it out of your workspace and have a clearer workspace. And the same goes for stuff that you might buy in bulk, like cutter blocks, I don't know, cutters, saws, screws, anything like that. So like tools that you don't use very often, if you've got a small workshop, you can have some racking in the end of your container and just get rid of it, and you know they're going to be kept in tip-top condition because it's acclimatized and it's in a nice, warm, safe environment. So yeah, it's one of the best things I ever did. I do get quite a lot of sort of negative comments saying about wasting money or where's the windows. It's like I say, hands down probably one of the best things I've done for my workshop on a sort of bang for buck basis. So 100% recommend it. Right, so someone else has asked about the foam expanding the timbers. Did I have any issues with the spray foam being applied to the walls and then pushing the timbers away? The answer to that is no. It's very, very gentle. It sort of, you spray it on, it just sort of, it's very light sort of foam product that expands around the timber, and then once it sets, it just sets where it is. There's no sort of like it part sets and then pushes itself away. It just expands and sets in a one piece, so there's absolutely no chance of anything moving once that foam's going off. So you don't fasten the container, it's just a skeleton, that's it. Here we go, this is another one that's quite good. Someone asked about the gap that's left between the expanding foam, between the battens and then the boarding that I've put on top. So there was sort of a cavity in that wall. They're seeing that as a detrimental thing. I see that as a positive thing. So you're actually adding an extra piece of insulation there. So it's a separate air gap between the insulation, the panelling and the inside, so it's actually giving you an extra piece of insulation. It's not fully sealed, so there's not going to be any moisture build up in that part, because you've still got the edges of the sheets where it can sort of breathe. It'll probably breathe through the wood of the OSB very slightly, so it's not a sealed air gap, but it is another barrier that's not just free air within the container. So it's not an issue at all, and I think it actually probably helps very slightly to the insulation value of the container. People are asking about how much insulation to have and thickness. To be honest, if you've got a small heater in here and no drafts, 1 inch is probably enough. I mean, 2 inch, the guys said if you're actually heating it and want it to stay warm for a decent amount of time, just put 2 inches in and that'll be plenty. I just had the 1 inch because it's not that essential, to be honest. And if you have got a small heater in here and you were building one of these to live in and had windows and made it sort of a small house, it literally would take no heating whatsoever. I think just the body heat of you being in here and maybe moving around a bit would almost heat itself with just 1 inch of insulation. So people were commenting about I'm going to have 6-7 inches of insulation in here, and I can't really see it making a massive difference. Maybe in the summer when it's really hot and it's sort of beating down, the sun's beating down on the steel roof, it might help you in that way, in that it'll keep it cooler inside. But like I say, I couldn't really see the benefit to having loads and loads of insulation versus the cost of it. So yeah, the 1 inch that I've had has been really effective. Not thought about painting it white because what's the point? It's a storage container. A lot of people were also commenting about where's the windows. The title of the video literally said storage container, so I'm not sure why you would want to put a little window over in for people to see what you've got in your storage container. It seemed a bit senseless to me. Yeah, there's a lot of topic about the temperature difference before and after, and it's kind of irrelevant unless you're heating the space before and after. Then you're kind of not going to get a representative example of what it was like before. I didn't have any heat in the steel container, but yeah, it wouldn't last very long at all. My brother's got one that's uninsulated and he's got a few bits of kit in that, and he'll have the heat on in the day, and by the time it gets to evening time on a winter's day, if you turn the heater off, it's cold within an hour or so. So yeah, it makes a massive difference. Right, so moisture difference in acclimatising this timber versus how it would have come from the supplier. So suppliers, if you go to James Latham's yard, it's literally a big sort of steel frame building with racking in it, and the timber's stacked on there. It comes from the kiln, delivered from the kiln drying, in the pallets, in the packs, stacked on the racks, and then it's delivered to your workshop, and that's what's sold to you as kiln dried product. Generally they'll say it's about 15% moisture, depending on what you buy and what you're using it for. So your general joinery timber is 15, sold at 15 for external joinery, and then sort of your internal stuff wants to be a touch drier, but it's hard. They wouldn't dry it much lower than that, because just the ambient moisture of it sat in them type of environments, it's just going to bring that moisture content back up. So it's going to be a waste of money drying it lower than that moisture content to then leave it there to gain it all back. So I have quickly just tested, but I'll show it on camera as well. I've set this is a little moisture meter. You don't stick the pins in, it's just a one that does it through I guess like a radio frequency or something that's checking the density of the timber. There isn't a species listed for poplar or tulip wood, which is what I'm testing, but I've gone off sort of timbers that are very similar nearby to it and set it up for that. It'll just give a good representative between the two, whatever, whether the value's correct, it will show the difference between acclimatised and not. So this is the stuff that's been in here about 3 months now. I've been emptying the dehumidifiers. There's 3 cubic metres of timber, 2 dehumidifiers with 2.3 litre tanks, and I've emptied them 7 times. So 7 times 4.6, and this timber is 12.5%, so I'll show you that on there to show you that I'm not cheating. There we go. So if I push that down onto there, 12.5. Let's go over here. 11. Depends on the density of the timber with these moisture meters, but yeah, about 12% I'm going to guess. So I'll go into the other room, into my rack that's just in like the same style of warehouse as the timber would be. Right, so here's a bit of tulip wood. This is sitting in the barn. It's dry, it sits in here, and it's basically exactly the same environment as it would be at a timber yard. This has been in here, this was delivered at the same time as the other timber, so it sat in here over summer. It's now October, mid-October, so it's had a fairly dry summer, so we've not really had a lot of rain up to now. It's definitely not sitting wet, so it's not midwinter where the air is just damp. This is actually quite dry for the time of year, so obviously this difference between the two would change a lot by the time we get into sort of January, February times. This would be a lot greener or a lot wetter than the timber that's in the container, but I'll just stick that on there. Remember, this is relative moisture content, it might not be accurate to the numbers, but I've not changed the settings, and that's showing 17.4. I'll come down this end. When I did it just now it said 15.6, but there you go, 16.6. I assume you can see that on camera. There we go, somewhere there. 16.7. So I think it's fairly safe to say that if you're using the timber in an internal environment where it's going to be in a centrally heated house and going to be nice and dry, taking it straight from the supplier, using it and expecting it to perform and stay as you've made it in that sort of household environment is a lot to ask, bearing in mind that timber will actually change size and twist and all sorts with that change in moisture content. So like I say, probably the best money I've spent is having that container to acclimatise that timber. Anyway, sorry about all the boring questions and ranting on with not really a lot to see, but hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope it answers a few questions and gives anyone that's thinking about doing something like this a bit of an insight into it, and pushes you over the edge if you're just thinking about it and might actually go and do it.